Hey everyone, Rob B here with Rob D, and you are listening to the Property Podcast. It's episode 241. And this week, we're going to look at your BMVs, your ASTs, your BTLs, your GDVs. This week, we're mystifying property jargon, so we better get on with it ASAP.
Very good, Rob. Very good. It's welcome to the Property Podcast. If you've been listening to the last 240 episodes and you're wondering what the hell we've been talking about all this time, well, you probably should have asked before now. But seeing as you haven't, that's fine. We're going to be going through all the kind of terms that get thrown around and explaining exactly what they mean. We've also got a resource, which is, wait for it, an interactive map and a news story as well. But first, Rob, we've got some announcements of our own.
We have loads going on. First one, quick one. We've got meetups. Yay, meetups next week. First Thursday of every month. We've got over 30 around the world, mostly in the UK, probably one local to you, unless you're listening to us in Ukraine, Iran, Iraq. Well, you get the picture. We're in most places. Go to thepropertyhub.net/meetups. That's thepropertyhub.net/meetups and get your free ticket. I will be at Cheltenham. Rob will be somewhere. But who knows, he might be at yours, we don't know yet. But those people in Cheltenham, you've been warned. Whether you want to turn up there now or not is up to you, but at least you know I'm going. And I've not been to that meetup yet, Rob, so I'm looking forward to it.
Yep, they're all a little bit different. So I enjoy getting around loads of them. So maybe if you're in between two meetups and you've been to one but you haven't been to the other, maybe go somewhere new this month. So lots of options, lots for you to choose from. Now, we're giving you a free evening of entertainment on the first Thursday of every month, but would you like a job as well?
Life sorted with the Property Podcast.
Yeah, exactly. So you can come and work with us. We are going to be advertising for a lot of roles over the next few months. There's a fair bit going on. But right now, you can come and join our team at Yellow Lettings. The business is growing so quickly. We've got a great team already, but we need that team to be bolstered in certain areas. So if you are in the Midlands or anywhere in the north of England and you're looking for an exciting role that keeps you very busy day to day, then you'll be wanting to go to thepropertyhub.net/jobs. Keep an eye on that link because there are going to be more jobs going up, like I said, over the next couple of months because there's all kinds of positions being created. So you can find those Yellow Lettings jobs on there. If you're looking for perhaps your first step into property, you're wanting to sort of get your first job in the industry, this could be ideal for you. So get over to thepropertyhub.net/jobs and all the details will be there.
Yeah, as Rob said, save that link. Lots of exciting stuff happening now. But Yellow, super exciting. Loads of growth. So there's multiple roles available. So check it out. Okay, on to our news story of the week. And this week's story comes from The Guardian. And the headline of this story is the government plans to crack down on overpriced property service charges. Sounds like a good one to me, Rob.
Yeah, they're on a bit of a mad one at the moment, aren't they? There's always cracking down on something or other. So there's a ban on lettings fees, which hasn't quite happened yet, but it's going to happen at some point, apparently. There's the call for all agents to be regulated, which I think they've now said they're going to do. I kind of lose track. There are so many initiatives all the time. They're great at announcing stuff, perhaps not quite so good at following through on them. And this time it's service charges. So this was announced by Sajid Javid. He said that ministers are considering changing the law to create a fairer property management system and make it easier to outlaw rogue letting and management agents. So what should we make of this? Well, who knows really? Because with things like this, you never quite know if it's just a headline that goes away quietly and nothing really happens, or if they're going to do anything with it. But as anyone who owns a flat will know, the leasehold system is interesting, to say the least. You can have some very variable experience with block management companies and freeholders. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that. There's all kinds of complaints that people will have. What will the common themes be? And will they be able to do anything about it? We will see. But as part of that, there's a call for evidence. And so if you feel particularly strongly about service charges and you want to have your say, we will link to that consultation in the show notes this week, which you will find at thepropertyhub.net/jargon.
Okay, so let's do that. Lots of jargon in property. They like to make it complex and make things sound really difficult and really complex when they don't need to be, Rob. So we're going to sort that.
Yeah, we are. And you're right. There is so much jargon flying around. Things that to us make perfect sense. But to you, when you're just getting into it, it's like, what on earth does that mean? And a lot of acronyms as well. Lots of those flying around. Lots of them quite similar, all meaning different things. And they come about for different reasons. So you end up with lots of acronyms being used because it's quicker. It saves loads of time. But you can just end up looking at a sentence when you're first getting into property and just sort of seeing it all and go, I have no idea what that actually means. So people use it to save time. I think people also use it, let's be honest, to sound a bit cleverer and to make it sound more complicated than it really is. So today we're just going to rattle through a whole load of these. We've listed everything that we can think of that might not be immediately obvious to somebody who's coming into property for the first time. Hopefully this is going to be more exciting than just listening to someone read out a dictionary. We're going to go through them as quickly as we can. Chances are if you're a regular listener, you'll have heard of a lot of them, but I would place a cheeky wager that there's going to be at least one or two things that is going to be new to everyone listening.
I wouldn't be surprised either. So let's start with the basics. BTL. Now, if you're really new, you may think it's a sandwich, but BTL stands for buy to let. And it's what we do. We buy properties to let them out. It's that simple. Next
up, a flip. So if you're not buying a property and letting it out, you're buying a property, doing it up in some kind of way, and selling it on again. If you do that, that could be called buy to sell. So you see the acronym BTS rather than BTL, but also commonly known as flipping.
Okay, next up on the list is HMO. You've probably heard about HMOs mentioned many a time, and it stands for houses or homes of multiple occupancy. So it's taking a building, often a house, and putting multiple tenants into that one property. And that's it. So instead of having one tenant with one tenancy agreement, you'll have multiple tenants with multiple tenancy agreements, and that's a HMO.
Another way of having a property occupied is instead of having one tenant or even multiple tenants for a long period of time, you have people coming for shorter periods of time, maybe just a couple of days, a week, a couple of weeks. If you do that, that could either be a holiday let or serviced accommodation. Serviced accommodation is a newer term. It's something that's only really been around for the last few years since the rise of Airbnb. Basically, it's exactly the same as a holiday let. It just tends to be something like a city centre flat rather than something on the coast, used for business travellers predominantly. But it's exactly the same thing. It just means that rather than having a long-term tenant, you just have people coming and going all the time, kind of like a hotel. And with serviced accommodation, you'll normally pay all the bills and supply all the furniture and so on. So if you hear someone talking about serviced accommodation, just think holiday let or hotel, same kind of thing.
Okay, rent to rent. Sounds a bit bonkers. Maybe it is. But rent to rent is often bounded around lots of courses sold on rent to rent. What is it? People who participate in rent to rent look to get a property from somebody who owns it, often a house with multiple rooms, and pay that person a rent. And then they will go on to rent the rooms individually, which total a high amount, which makes them a profit. And that's called rent to rent. Now, you don't own the property. You just have a contract with the person who does own the property for some period of time. So it's not property investment. It's more of a property business. But people do it for cash flow, and that's rent to rent.
I'm glad I've been left for the next one. Lease option. How do I do the 30-second version of a lease option? This is something that a lot of people struggle to understand, and it's not immediately intuitive, but actually it's good to have it following on from rent to rent. Basically, it's the same sort of thing. You will not own a property. You will just take that property over, and you'll have the agreement to be able to run that property yourself and let it out. But there's another component. You'll have the option to buy that property at a fixed price in the future. So it's a lease. You have the right to take on the property and let it out. And there's also the option of buying it. So if you never end up executing that option, then it's basically the same as rent to rent. But if property prices go up and your option price is now looking pretty good, then you will take that option to buy and you will become the property owner. And at that point, it's just like a normal buy-to-let or HMO. If you're still struggling with that one, don't blame you. Don't worry about it too much. That is a more advanced technique. But if you see that term on a forum or something in the future, at least you now know roughly what it means. You do. Okay, so that's types of investment. Let's now get into stuff around valuations or finance. So first one, BMV, below market value. So what BMV is meant to be is that you look for a property and you get it at a discount that is below the market rate and therefore called below market value. Now, it's hard to establish what below market value is. You need to do a lot of work. Some people dispute it altogether. But ultimately, that's what it stands for, below market value. But a more simplistic way to look at it is a good discount or a good deal. So that's BMV. And the discount that you get will be the discount from open market value, or OMV. So when a valuer goes out to see what a property is worth, they'll take a look at it and take a look at its condition, see what's sold recently, compare it to what else is on the market, and they will come up with their opinion of the open market value, OMV, what you would expect in the current market someone to be willing to pay for the property. Of course, some people might pay more than what you'd expect the open market value to be because they really, really want to live there, or you might be able to get it BMV, but OMV, open market value, is just what the property is worth right now. OMG, we've got another V, it's GDV.
GDV is gross development value. So this is often used in development. So if you are looking at a block, you're building something out, what's it worth? What's the total sales price of that development? So what's the gross development value? So if it's 5 apartments, for example, what are they all worth in total on the market? That's the gross development value, GDV.
And one more V for you before we move on, LTV. LTV is loan to value. So this is what you'll see around mortgages, and it kind of makes sense when you think about it. It is the loan that you get as a proportion of the value. So if you take out a loan of £50,000 and you've got a property that's worth a value of £100,000, then your loan to value would be 50%. So that's all it means. LTV, the proportion of the property's price that you're borrowing.
Next up, OPM. No, not Afghanistan's favourite export. OPM is other people's money. So it's a bit like loan to value, but sometimes you hear this one bounded about. And it's using leverage or other people's money, which could be a bank or an individual, as in a JV partner, to further your property investment endeavours. So that's OPM.
On fire with the puns today, Rob. Right, let's move on from the TLAs, 3-letter acronyms, and talk about valuation metrics instead. So the first one that you'll often see is gross yield. There are 2 types of yield. We'll come on to the second one, and it can be confusing because people often don't say which one they're talking about. But the first one that we'll talk about is gross yield. And that is very simply the annual rent that you'd expect a property to get divided by the amount that you pay for it. So a property produces an annual rent of £10,000. It's worth £100,000, or that's what you pay for it. Therefore, the gross yield, 10%. Easy. The other type of yield is net yield. A little bit more complicated to work out, but a little bit more useful because it takes more into account. So the net yield is the profit that you would expect to make from a property after you've deducted your expenses, divided by the price you pay for it. So that property that's producing £10,000 in rent annually will say that you've got costs of £5,000, such as your management fees and so on. Once you've deducted those, the actual amount of money in your pocket is £5,000. The property is worth £10,000, therefore the net yield is 5%.
But our preferred way of assessing an investment isn't gross yield or net yield, but actually ROI, or sometimes referred to as ROCE. ROI is return on investment, and ROCE is return on capital employed. But basically, it's the same thing. And that's how much money are you putting into the deal versus how much you're going to get out in income each year. So if you put £20,000 into the deal in terms of deposit and other fees, but you make £2,000 profit each year, then your return on investment or return on capital employed would be 10%. But don't worry if those yields are a bit too fast for you and you fail to absorb them, especially if you're a newbie. We've got a podcast for you. Way back in episode 20, Rob, we did Yields Explained. Probably it'd be a nice raw episode when we were young, full of energy, and it's still a glint in our eye, and the government hadn't beaten us down yet with all their property manoeuvres. So go back to that episode, episode 20. The links will be in the show notes this week, which you can find at thepropertyhub.net/jargon.
No, more jargon for you around valuations and finance. So back onto the finance side, bridging. You kind of forget once you've been in property for a while that bridging kind of isn't something that you'd come across normally. So you think, well, what on earth is that? Bridging is like a short-term mortgage. So it's money that you'll borrow against a property, just like a mortgage, but you're only borrowing it for a period of normally up to 12 months. So not something that you'd use for a BTL, buy-to-let, but it is something that you might use for a flip. You raise short-term finance against a property, and then you pay it back either by taking out a mortgage or by selling the property on. So bridging finance, we've done an episode on as well, and we'll link to that. But for now, just think of it as a short-term mortgage.
Definitely want to get to the show notes this week. So next up, SVR, Standard Variable Rate. So you'll see this when you go for a mortgage. Now, you have your discounted rate in the beginning, or often have a discounted rate. And it may be that in current climate, you're paying, let's say, 3% on your buy-to-let mortgage. Now, that 3% may be locked in for a period of time, and quite often it's 2 years. So let's say you have that 2 years discount, but once that 2-year period has ended, you will then revert to what's called the standard variable rate, which in most cases is a higher rate. And therefore, most people then look to remortgage at that point. But the standard variable rate is what you will default onto if you do not change your mortgage. Now, some people have done very well with standard variable rates because before the crash, you had higher interest rates, and the standard variable rate was a percentage above the base interest rates. And then when the market crashed and interest rates were slashed, people had very favourable standard variable rates. I had one on my first buy-to-let, which made it from barely making anything to making a healthy profit every month. So standard variable rates actually helped me and many other people after the crash.
Oh, and I've been left with this one as well. Who put this together? Clause 24. This is one that could easily make no sense to you. Clause 24, also known as the Alice in Wonderland tax. No idea why it's called that. Also known as the tenant tax. Shouldn't be called that. Also known as lots of other things. But basically, it's all the same thing. It's where the government, as one of the first actions that they took against landlords, the first of many, decided that you could no longer claim your interest as a cost. So what does that mean? Well, in a business, if you borrow money in order to run your business and you pay interest on that money, then that interest is normally a cost of doing business. In property, they've decided that that doesn't apply anymore. So you can't offset your interest as a cost of doing business. You can instead claim an allowance. It's all very complicated, but the end effect of that is that you're probably going to pay more in tax than you would have done before, even though you're making the same profit that you were in the first place. 2 years in, I still haven't got a really snappy, easy explanation of this, but again, we'll give you a link in the show notes over to a course where we talk about that in a little bit more detail. If that's not something you're aware of, you should be, and Clause 24 is what it's called.
You can't complain, Rob. You did the show notes yourself this week. You've stitched yourself up.
I really have.
Okay, moving on now to tenancies and management. Okay, so first up is AST. Gosh, they do make things far too complex. Assured short-hold tenancy. Basically, just your standard tenancy agreement. Often ranging from 6 months to 2 years. That's what most mortgage companies will accept, so that's what most people do. Can vary in length, though. But an AST is just your tenancy agreement between you, the landlord, and your tenants. That's it. Really simple. Different versions of an AST. You can get templates on the internet. If you use a letting agent, they'll have their own version too, which hopefully should be very robust, but a simple contract between you and your tenant.
Yeah, exactly. There are sort of niche forms of tenancy that float around for different circumstances, but they're pretty rare. Normally, for any practical purposes, if you see AST, just read tenancy agreement. Simple as that. Something else that's quite simple, but has lots of letters attached to it to make it sound more complicated, is LHA, also known as DSS, also now known as UC, or Universal Credit. They are all different ways of people receiving benefits because they're on low income. Way back when, it was called DSS. It's not anymore, but some people still call it that. LHA is the more recent version, that's Local Housing Allowance, and Universal Credit is now what they're not very successfully trying to roll out to replace that and replace lots of other benefits all in one. For your purposes as a property investor, you need to know about this because you need to decide whether you will accept tenants who are receiving either Universal Credit or LHA. Some do, some don't. If you are going to, then it's something you need to know about in more detail because there's lots to know about how and when you get paid and what you can do if you don't get paid. But for now, all you need to know is that all those acronyms basically means tenants receiving benefits.
So next up, leasehold and freehold. So freehold, the more simple one of the two. Freehold is if you buy a property, you own the land. So the land is yours. You own the property on that land. Really simple. It's called a freehold. You own the land and the property on the land. Leasehold, slightly different. You don't own the land. Somebody else does. But they lease you a proportion of that land. So if it's an apartment, sometimes houses, but more common with apartments, they lease that part of the land to you. There's a few reasons for doing this, but ultimately, in the UK, if you own a piece of land, you have the sky rights, which means that you own the land. Everything above it is yours. Doesn't mean you can build on it, but it's yours. Now, leasehold is different because you can't own a section of the sky, and in other countries you can. You can have a freehold apartment and you own that section of the sky. But because you can't do that in the UK, because really when you think about it, it sounds a bit mad that you own that piece of land 20 metres up, we have leaseholds. Now, there are leasehold houses, and there's lots of controversy around that. Just Google leasehold houses. And they're becoming less and less common now. But leasehold apartments or flats are here to stay. That's not changing for the reasons I've just mentioned. The length of which can vary. You can get leaseholds that are just about to run out, and therefore there's an opportunity, possibly, to do a good deal, but you won't be able to get a mortgage on it. Or you can get leaseholds all the way to 999 years. I've seen both extremes. New builds, well, you tend to get 100 to 25 years. Some providers offer you less and maybe 99 years, but I always look for 125 years or more. as a general rule of thumb. So that's leasehold and freehold.
And tell you what, we talked about leaseholds in more depth in episode 213, and we'll link you up to that as well. So the end is in sight. We are at Zulu in our dictionary, or the equivalent. We're nearly at the end. So let's talk about ending a tenancy. And to end a tenancy, you'll use a particular legal mechanism. There's two main ones. There's Section 21 and there's Section 8. So if you see someone talking about Section 21 or issuing a Section 21 notice, what they're talking about is saying to a tenant, it's time for you to leave. The main difference between a Section 21 and a Section 8 is that with Section 21, it's supposed to be the case that if you do everything properly, then the tenant cannot object. They can't take you to court. They have to move out when you want them to, and that is that. Section 8, by contrast, is not as good for you as the landlord because it's you saying, I want this tenant to move out, but if they contest it and they don't want to and they take it to court, the judge can find against you and allow them to stay. There's a lot of detail to know around those. If you find yourself wanting a tenant to leave, you should find out how to do that in a lot more detail. You should get some support, maybe get your letting agent to help you do it. But for our purposes right now, Section 21 and Section 8 are just two different ways of ending a tenancy. And that is the end of our episode. Whew. So there you go, a whole load of jargon, acronyms, strange terms particular to property. We really should have done that back in episode 1, but we've done it in episode 241 as well. So hopefully that will have been a useful refresher for you on certain terms. And like I said before, probably one or two others where it's like, oh, that's what it means. Because it's so easy to just let things drift by and not think to ask the question. So quite a few links in there that we mentioned where we're going to send you to get more information on some of those. You'll find them all in the show notes at thepropertyhub.net/jargon.
I'm really looking forward to next week's episode to tell you about. We've also got your resource of the week, which is an interactive map, which you're all going to want to use. But before we do, let's acknowledge the fine people who've left us a review this week. Thank you very much. Okay, P. Morg says, I'm very impressed with the knowledge and insight that Rob and Rob offer to listeners, free of charge, with no upsell. They clearly invest significant time and effort into producing these regular episodes. I'm new to the world of property investment. I've discovered this resource. I'm getting fantastic education, going through all the back episodes, along with accompanying resources on the website. And Rob D's books. Many thanks. Keep up the good work, guys. Hope to meet you in person at one of their meetups. Well, if you're going to Cheltenham P. Morg, we will meet. And just enough time to squeeze a quick one in. RSB76 says, a big thank you, Rob and Rob, for putting so much helpful information out there. It's great to get insight from real investors to be kept up to date with what's happening in the property market. I'm about to buy my first house, and even though it's not a buy-to-let, the podcasts have been really helpful. Cheers. Well, thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you indeed. And thank you for listening. But we can't let you go just yet because we've got to give you a resource of the week. And for this one, I've got to thank my wife, who clearly knows what I like. She knows I love an interactive map because she sent me this the other day, and it did indeed make me very happy because I just love playing around with those sliders.
Is it, Rob, or is it 240 episodes in? She said, you've never mentioned me on the podcast, so now you've had to find a way. Well, tell the truth.
It's one of those, who could say which one it is? But either way, you've got a resource out of it. This is a BBC house price calculator that will work out where you can afford to rent or buy. So you can select how many bedrooms you want, how much you can afford to pay monthly if it's rent, or what your deposit is if you're buying, and it'll show you on the map where you can afford. So I can think of a few practical uses for this. So maybe you want to see what kind of thing is affordable for the tenant type you're targeting, and you can go and set the monthly rent, or you can use it to figure out where you might be able to do a flip to target first-time buyers who've got a certain level of savings, and it'll even tell you what the national average deposit is. But let's be honest, I'm using it mainly just for the pretty colours and a bit of curiosity, really. But it's a lot of fun. Might be able to use it for something useful, but if not, it's a fun 5 minutes when you should be doing something else.
It is fun. If you've got 5 minutes of work, it looks serious, but you want to kill, then you could use that. Right. Next week, why our wives are the secret to our success. No, it's not really. Next week is, although they'd bloody love that, wouldn't they? Next week is the 10 years since the credit crunch. 10 years. Feels so recent still. And the repercussions of the credit crunch are still with us today. But 10 years on. Now, the reason we're covering this is it's the main feature in the magazine, which is landing on people's doorsteps as we speak. If you haven't got it yet, it'll be with you very shortly. And it's the main lead feature. If you don't subscribe to the magazine, you're a bit nuts. Go to thepropertyhub.net/magazine, and you can get digital copies of all the back episodes and make sure you don't miss out on a future one. But this is the lead feature, 10 years since the credit crunch. What we're going to do next week is take the main aspects from that article. Don't worry, we're not going to read the article out to you. but also touch on the lessons that you really mustn't forget. Rob and I were active around the last credit crunch, and I remember being in property before and everything was going nuts, and then being in it after. It was a very different place, and it's been a really interesting environment over the last 10 years. So interesting. So make sure you don't miss that one. It's going to be a must listen to.
Of course it is. It always is. As is Ask Rob and Rob, which is coming up on Tuesday. So lots of good stuff coming up. In the meantime, make sure you book your ticket for the meetup, and also go over to thepropertyhub.net/jobs. If listening to us talk about property a couple of times a week isn't enough for you and you want to work in property, that's a great place to go. But one way or another, we'll speak to you very soon. Bye-bye.
Yep. TTYL. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Property Podcast. For show notes, all our past episodes, and to leave a review, go to thepropertyhub.net/podcast.